Welcome in, 11 o'clock. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on this Wednesday morning. It has been a very, very exciting Wednesday so far here on the game. As we teased a lot yesterday, a big announcement was made this morning on the early game with Bill right here on the game, and we won't bury the lead. Here's that announcement.
Good morning, everybody. It's Cam Scott here from Lexington, and I'm proud to announce that I am now a Carolina Gamecock, and we'll be joining the Gamecocks men's basketball team for the next year. I'm very excited. Thank you for having me, and I'm just looking forward to making big things happen here in the SEC. So yeah, Spurs up, go Cock.
So there it was this morning at 8 o'clock on the early game with Bill Gunter. Cam Scott making his official commitment to the University of South Carolina. Of course, previously a Texas commit, made that commitment back in August, was released from his national letter of intent last week, and a lot of speculation that he was going to join Lamont Paris's team in the days leading up to today, and lo and behold, it is indeed true, and very cool that we got to be a part of that today.
Yeah, obviously huge news for South Carolina. Once again, doing what they need to do in state, and that's something that has always been, I would say, an obvious thing, but it's definitely easier said than done. Can you sort of put a fence around the state of South Carolina? And I think we've seen this state produces talent in basketball, both men and women's basketball. And I think I've always thought, everybody's kind of always thought, if you could keep not even all these guys, some of these guys at home, you could build a core of players that's really, really talented. And, I think with Cam Scott, you're talking about a guy, consensus #1 prospect in the state of South Carolina for this cycle. You can go through all the major recruiting sites. He's #1 for the state in all of them. Top 35 national guy, a top 10 guy at his shooting guard position. And it's just massive, both from a standpoint of on the court, what you're getting, and a guy that Lamont Paris told he wants to sort of run his offense through, and then off the court as well, just the attention, the perception, the fact that you're, again, getting another great Midlands guy. Great day for the Gamecocks.
I want to get back to Cam specifically, but to hit on something you just said, Wes, I'm glad you said that. It's something I wanted to bring up. The in-state recruiting, this has been a pain point for Gamecock fans for a long time, for years. There's been stories written about it. It's been talked about here on the game and podcasts on Gamecock Central. I mean, it's a big discussion topic, and it's not even guys just the big-time obvious type guys, right? A Ja Morant, right, coming out of high school, who, although he didn't go to a blue blood, everybody knew how good he was. It's not just those types. Remember when the portal opened for basketball, and we'd be like, I've never even heard of that kid. We don't cover basketball recruiting like Jamie Shaw does or Joe Tipton or somebody like that. You're like, this kid's at this school. Oh, he's a South Carolina native, and he's really good. He's going to end up jumping up a level. They're just so deep year after year with basketball talent in the state. So now you kind of go back and look at what Lamont's done. He was able to, Zach Davis was a holdover basically in the first class, but he's an in-state guy. You got G.G. Jackson, right? You've now gotten Cam Scott to stay home. Colin Murray Boyles, who was a Columbia kid. Arden Conyers in that same class. Not a year one impact guy, but down the road could be for you. You look ahead in the 2025 class, you've got another upstate product in Hayden Assemian. So you start to see now the in-state recruiting. It's been a priority, and it's something that they've done a really good job at. And obviously GG was a huge get, but Cam Scott, national level player right here in the Midlands, huge as well.
Yeah, man, there's some depth, and I think it is, in some ways it is like football in that you got to figure out which of the guys in that kind of top 10, top 15 are going to end up developing into stars and keep, look at this year's team, a Talon Cooper who left, developed, comes back, and is phenomenal for you. Even Ja Morant was not he turned into a way better player than he was maybe believed to be at the time when he was being recruited. So you got to obviously have the evaluation piece, but if you look just by the rankings alone, you could argue that they've now landed the top prospect in the state for 3 years running. And, if you want to get very technical with that, CMB played his final year of high school ball in Utah. There's maybe a guy or two that was higher than him, depending on how you look at it. But in basketball, also, it kind of gets a little bit messy when you're trying to sort of determine that, if you want to get really technical, because I think if you look at the rankings, like a Cohen Carr is technically listed as number 1, but he's not actually from South Carolina, even though he played in South Carolina. CMB didn't play in South Carolina's final year, but is definitely a Midlands guy. The Butler kid, Jordan Butler, that went to Missouri, I think he was more highly rated than CMB, but you look at what they've done their first year in college. If you're rewriting history, CMB, we're going to call him the best player in the state for that class. So the reality of it is you've landed 3 classes in a row. You've landed a difference maker from the state of South Carolina, and Midlands guys at that. And I'm kind of reminded when they first hired Kerry Rich, he came on 107.5, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he was basically like, look, you're not going to get every guy in the state of South Carolina, but we're going to make it dang hard on them to tell us no. We're going to make it difficult. And we've seen all the way to the extent of you've had 2 guys now that have been committed to other schools, and in the case of Cam, signed with another school, and still it was hard for them to say no to staying at home, and that was the case with 3 guys here in a row.
Well, I think it just speaks volumes to the buy-in that people have with Lamont Paris and what he's done in a short time here in 2 years in South Carolina, where obviously they exceeded everyone's expectations this past year by getting to the NCAA tournament. We talked with Jacoby Wright on the Garner Trust Hour yesterday, and just kind of how that resonates not only with the guys already on his team, but with the local community and guys within the state. It is a very talent-rich state to be able to bring in a guy like Cam Scott, who we expect big things out of. And, hopefully he's going to be around for a long time, but he does have looks at being a, NBA draft pick as well. So if you only have him for a year, hopefully you can get the most out of him, and he can help lead this team to great heights, next year as well.
Yeah, and I think this is a guy who wants to come in and develop, and you look at his game, you look at what he's capable of, and super athlete. Like there's a highlight tape on YouTube from, I think, his senior year, and it's like just 12 minutes of him cooking guys. And one of the most just natural, smooth-looking athletes I feel like I've ever seen. I do wonder, maybe I should have texted Bill Gunner, Mr. Lexington, and asked, Cam's got to be related to Shaq Rowland. Like, Shaq Rowland, you remember just how effortless Shaq moved?
It was something to see.
Like
basketball or football.
Yeah.
Either one.
Effortless. And that's kind of the way Cam is. It's just effortless. And you look at this team for next year, you look at, obviously, losing Michi. You could potentially plug Cam right into that kind of 2-guard spot. And, I think just brings a ton of natural ability to the court. Now, there's going to be some things, obviously. Cam even told me this. He said Coach Paris has already been talking about basically parts of my game he wants to tweak, parts of my game he wants to develop. He knows he's not a finished product, but
and you mentioned eventually kind of run the offense through, and we know he's not going to come in and necessarily take over the exact same role that like Talon Cooper had or something like that. Obviously, Carolina's going to address things in the transfer portal, but playing that second option on offense, like you said, with somebody like Amici Johnson, what he's able to do this past season could be a perfect role for somebody like him.
Yeah, and I think he can be a scorer. Like I think he's probably a 2-guard. He's not he's not going to play the point. I think that's something they still have to address. But when you look at what he could bring to this team in terms of just raw athleticism, and I think a little bit of a flair for the dramatic in terms of his game on the court as well. And what I mean by that is he wants the basketball when the game is on the line. There are some natural leadership qualities here. Good communicator. He can facilitate. He can pass the basketball when he needs to. But this is a guy who can score in a variety of ways based on that length and height and athleticism, ability to finish. He's got a pretty smooth-looking shot, too. I know he wants to work on kind of his long range, work on his three-point shooting. That's something that I think this staff will help him a great deal with. But when you're talking about a top 35 player in the country, you're talking about somebody with a lot to work with already. And so obviously not a finished product, but in terms of upside ability, got to play defense if you're going to get on the court for Paris too. So that will be a focus, I'm sure. But, man, when you just talk about versatility and being just a multi-dimensional guy, lot to like about him, as Chris Clark would say.
Yes. You know, I was talking to Jacoby Wright, by the way. We can say this now since this is all past. You know, Jacoby was in here yesterday on the Garnet Trust Hour, and he had gotten wind of, you know, what was to come, and knows Cam and had talked to him. They're both in-state guys. They know each other, and he was excited about it. But Jacoby said, Wes, not in relation to Cam, but just generally, we're talking on the Garnet Trust Hour. I said, what's the one thing that you have to be able to do, not kind of a non-negotiable, to get on the floor for Paris? And he said, yeah, you gotta play defense. That's the thing you got to be able to do. So, you know, I think a lot of people, again, there will be high expectations for Cam, and there should be with the type of player he is. There's some things to develop there, but, man, he has so many tools where you can just see, like, that canvas. Like, he's already really good, but you can see the areas of his game that might still need some work. There's, you know, sky's the limit type of deal, I think.
Yeah, and talking to Elijah, who, you know, covered him closely when he was playing AAU basketball, you know, said that his game kind of maybe falls in line with playing a little bit more fast tempo, which, again, coming into the Lamont Pierce system, you're going to have to slow things down a little bit and kind of get used to playing that style. But doing that, obviously adjusting to playing on defense, that's where the development's going to come in. But as we've seen so far, you know, Coach Pierce and his, you know, his crew of coaches do a really good job at that, and Cam Scott can hopefully do a lot of great things in a Gamecock uniform for however long he's here.
Yeah, and I think with Coach Paris, you're talking about this guy's a basketball head, and I mean that in the most flattering way possible, in that he is a guy who I think will adjust his approach and scheme and kind of what they want to be on offense and defense based on the talent he has. So I think you look at this past season, you know, you had a unique guy like B.J. Mack, and you know obviously what you had with Michi as a guy who would launch from three and kind of it was a very interesting approach, I think, in having so many guys on the floor who can shoot. Does that get adjusted? I still think maybe with a B.J. Mack replacement, like that's going to be difficult to find in terms of a 5 out there as a transfer. Now, we've heard the talk about CMB and his shooting ability and the fact that he actually can extend out. Does CMB spend the entire offseason sort of adjusting his game and taking over that role? But my point being, I don't think this is ever going to be like a run and gun offense. A big part of what they do defensively is also that they do not give up those easy buckets by going too fast and then creating turnovers the other way. However, as they get more athletic, I could see them adjusting a bit of what they are. And you're talking about if they can get what they want to close out this roster, this is going to be a very tall group, top to bottom. Like I think the days of, you know, there are some times where Carolina's had like shorter point guards over the years. I think the days of having shorter guys on the floor are kind of over. If they have their way, this is going to be a very lengthy, tall, long-armed lineup that features athleticism.
Well, excited to see Cam Scott join the Gamecock team. Again, he was in here with Bill for the entire 8 o'clock hour. If you missed any of that conversation, head to the 107.5 Game podcasting page or go to the Game TV. You can watch the replay of him making his announcement again earlier on this morning. Coach Beamer spoke to the media yesterday ahead of Saturday's spring game, talking about a number of things, including the transfer portal that opened up yesterday and some of the targets they're going to be looking at. We'll hear what he had to say about that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the Game.
Sorry, I was not mentally prepared.
All right, guys, not going to lie to you. Absolutely starving right now. I need some Firehouse Subs in my life. I'm staring at a sub on the screen right now, and it's killing me. But guess what? I can't order it yet. Can't go get it right now, but you can. Go to your local Firehouse Subs, firehousesubs.com. Download the Firehouse Subs app. I promise you, wherever you are in the Midlands, there is a Firehouse Subs pretty close to you, probably even within walking distance, but certainly within short driving distance. If you want to try something new, try this new barbecue Cuban. It's Southern roots with a Cuban twist. Or go with some of my favorites, the brisket add bacon, currently #1 on the power rankings for me personally. But whatever it is you like, whatever your preference, I'm sure they've got a sub for you. At this point, we've tried about all of them. So why don't you do that? Try every single sub you can, just like us. FirehouseSubs.com and the Firehouse Subs app. Order lunch now and bring me some too.
Welcome back in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell. Chris Clark along with you here on this Wednesday morning. Reminder once again, you can purchase the craft beer card on 1075thegame.com. Go to the website, click on the Sweet Deals tab, and you can purchase it. $360 value, all yours for just $79. Of course, coming up Saturday night, it is the spring game, capping off a spring practice for the Gamecocks yesterday. Coach Beamer speaking to the media as he does each and every Tuesday during the spring. And while the focus is on the game this weekend, a lot of conversation to be had about the transfer portal, which did open up yesterday, and what kind of activity South Carolina could have in it and who they might be going after. Let's go with cut number one here, Dave. Here's Coach Beamer speaking on portal targets yesterday.
Yeah, I think always with the portal being open, you have to look at how you can make your team better, and that's my job as the head coach. If there's someone that fits what we're about on the field and off the field, it's my job as the head coach to try and get them in here into our program. We're like every program and every coach, David, in that every position we have a target number of guys that we want to have on scholarship, and some of those positions, some positions we're at that position, we're at that number. Other positions we're not. Offensive line right now, based on the target number of guys that we would like to have on scholarship, we're a couple under. Wide receiver right now, we're a couple under. There's some positions that we might be over, but certainly from a depth standpoint, being able to practice, have your full arsenal. Receiver and offensive line are two positions. Not that I'm saying we need to get better, but just from a depth standpoint, being able to practice, have a two deep, guys on scholarship, those are positions that just we're not where we want to be as far as the minimum number of guys that we have on scholarship. Doesn't mean that we're in trouble if we don't add people there. No, but those would be a couple spots that we're looking at just from a depth standpoint for sure.
And he brought it up right there at the very end. I compare this to where you were a season ago with something like the running back room, where you definitely needed more running backs in the transfer portal, and South Carolina was not able to get any via the spring cycle, and that's why De'Carrion Joyner ended up being a running back. When the season rolls around, we obviously know how that ended up working out. As he mentioned, you'd love to get another wide receiver, you'd love to get another offensive lineman, but if you don't, it's not the end of the world because you have a lot of bodies in those rooms already. You just ideally like to add a few more pieces, if possible, depending on who's out there when you're looking in the portal.
Well, life a lot of times is about how you present things, and I actually think that's a fantastic way to present it if you're Shane Beamer, because let's be honest, transfer portal world we're in right now, if I'm playing one of those positions, hey, coach, why'd you go on the press conference and say you needed a better receiver, you need a better offensive lineman? That's not what I said, man. I just said we need more. We need more. And so I think the reality is, yeah, if you can go get a receiver who can come in and be that true X guy, you do need that, I think. And we can sit here and say that, but as the head coach, everything you say is scrutinized, everything you say is talked about. So I think that's a very, very keen way to present that. And I think if you're South Carolina, we already talked about wide receiver. We talked about this yesterday. That was a given, and that was something we were hearing, that you maybe would see South Carolina maybe not even take one, potentially take two if it's the right two, I think. But that was an obvious. The position group that has kind of been tacked on now, and we were sort of going through what spot would they even consider. Offensive line is kind of the one we maybe haven't talked about as much. We saw them stack a few offensive linemen in there during the previous transfer cycle, but it seems like they are just absolutely doing everything they possibly can to, one, this offseason fix the running game, but two, not have what happened last year in terms of offensive line depth.
So my glance at the roster here and counting indicates they've got 15 offensive linemen on scholarship.
That is a little short.
Little short. I mean, generally you want to be, up to 18.
Teams are more like 17, 18.
17, 18 is where you generally want to be, which actually, it's not like I know who's on the roster on scholarship on the O-line, but I haven't gone up and down and actually counted it. So when Beamer said that, I'm like, because the perception is, I think it's more than a perception. It is, I think, a reality. As long as they're healthy, they will have some more depth this year. Mm-hmm. But it can be both. It can be you have more depth, but, hey, we'd like to add a couple more guys here, preferably with some experience from the transfer portal on this back end, because some of those guys out of your 15, some of them are young. Josiah Thompson is a freshman. Cam Pringle, Blake Franks, freshman. You've got some younger guys, Tree, Tro, Marquis Anderson, they're still young, right? And so you would like to add some more in there just because, look, to your point, Wes, you're determined not to let last year happen from a depth standpoint and a performance standpoint. It can add up for you in a hurry. I don't think we're going to see 9, 10 offensive linemen at a time injured again because the odds of that are very low. But if you have a few, you can be in a bad spot again.
On the flip side of things, once spring practice concludes, as they do each and every year, they're going to meet with all the players individually, kind of give them an assessment of where they stand, where they think they're going to be as far as contributions this fall. And that's where you have, as Wes likes to talk about, those healthy transfers of guys that are going to say, hey, I'm not getting the playing time I want here. Let me go search an opportunity somewhere else. Where do you think those healthy transfers are going to be coming from on this team next week?
Yeah, and I think if you really kind of want to figure out where should I be expecting there to maybe be guys, you got to start to, you want to talk about the depth, start to look at where you would project the kind of bottom of that depth to be, frankly. And some maybe guys you haven't heard as much about this spring, maybe guys that seem to be buried behind some other guys. And in a lot of cases, it's these are your more traditional transfers. Like these types of transfers have been happening for decades, and it's just Coach, it sounds like I'm not really going to play much. And Coach is like, yeah, you're not. And then it's like, let me go find somewhere I can.
Sure.
And I think Chris brought this point up, so I won't steal it, but I'll just bring it up. That no SEC to SEC transfer right now, I actually think is a great rule for SEC teams because you're not, from a conference standpoint, how many guys went SEC to SEC during the last portal window?
Bunch.
And I think they probably felt like they had to allow that in a general sense. But now that their teams are truly trying, their coaches are trying to like figure out who they're actually going to have this season, and you're getting into spring practice, obviously, and then completing that. Next thing you know, it's the summer. Knowing who's on your roster, from an SEC standpoint, you don't want basically the teams to be cannibalizing each other at this point. So if you're taking care of your roster from a resources and NIL standpoint and your players are happy, if you're South Carolina, if you're another SEC team, you feel pretty good about keeping the players you want without worrying about another SEC school tampering with you right now and just saying, well, hey, we're going to throw a bag at you and make this guy say no. So I think the no SEC to SEC is one of the big things that maybe is slowing down this portal window a little bit.
Because right now, I mean, you can, and to clarify that a little bit, like you can go, but you got to sit out. So effectively, it's not allowed. I mean, nobody nowadays is going to look at it and say, "Oh, I got to sit out." Like, who goes anywhere and sits out now? Because that's pretty much the only instance that you see in the portal. Otherwise, everything's fair game. And you know what, guys? Honestly, I actually like that too, Wes. I'm with you. As soon as that gets challenged, that'll get knocked out as well.
Everything has been up to this point. So why not?
But I think if you're looking for the starting point, and we're not going to speculate on guys until we actually know who, if anybody does leave. Again, that can be before the spring game. It can be after. Some people might go through the entire spring and ride it out. Say, okay, in the spring game, I kind of see where it's at. We have the exit interviews. We go from there. If we do see activity, it'll probably be after the spring game, I would think. But if you look at guys who are on the back end of their careers who have not factored in as much, like you said, Wes, I think that's a good starting point. And look, I wonder, we were talking about the O-line earlier. Out of those 15, what if you lose an offensive lineman or two who feels like he's in that boat? Well, now you're down to, 14, 13, whatever. And so looking in the portal, I think, makes a lot of sense.
We'll hear more from Coach Beamer as he previews what's going to be coming up on Saturday with the spring game, who the potential showouts of that game could be. We'll get his thoughts coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday morning on the game.
The Game TV was set up by our friends Michael and Nathan and their entire team at Integrated Media, and they have done, of course, an awesome job. So we hope you're enjoying streaming that if you do. But they can do so much more than, you probably don't need, unless you're doing something, some kind of media production at your home or business. You might not need a bunch of streaming cameras, but what you might need is a new television. You might need Sonos wireless speakers. You might need to upgrade your internet signal at your home. Integrated Media can take care of all of that stuff for you. I was actually just looking at their Twitter profile. They put a TV on a ceramic tile fireplace. They can do that. They can put it on drywall, shiplap, stone, brick, or even tile. They can mount it. It'll look outstanding for you. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327. Check them out on Instagram and Facebook at Integrated Media Columbia for some examples of past work and some inspiration. Integrated Media, IntegratedMediaInc.com.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark with you on this Wednesday, reacting to what we heard from Coach Beamer yesterday. Speaking of the media in the final week of spring practice, one question that he got, and this is a little bit of a longer answer, but I want to let everyone hear it. He was posed the question of who he thinks might show out at the spring game coming up on Saturday. Go with cut number 9 here, Dave.
Man. You'll see all those running backs. Obviously, Rockets out right now, but Jawarn Howe, DJ Braswell, Oscar Attaway, really good opportunity for those guys, new guys to show what they can do, and they're excited about that as well. Torricelli Simpkins on the offensive line is a guy that probably wasn't very heralded when he came here. We knew we were getting a really good player, but I think he's had a really good spring as well. I know he has. Gerald Kilgore, Jalen's brother, has done some really good things in that transfer group. There's no question we're better and we're deeper. We're better and we're more athletic at linebacker, and that's because of who we returned, Debo and Bam, but then being able to add Wendell Gregory, Fred Johnson, Bengali Kamara, and Demetrius Knight. Like, that's a really fun group to watch compete on the practice field. So I could go on and on at all positions that I'm excited about. And that's the other thing. It's all these transfers, but it's so many freshmen. I mean, there'll be more true freshmen playing in this game Saturday night than what there was last year, because we had a lot of guys. If you stayed, did you stay for the talk last night? Or did you eat and get out? Well, if you had stayed, we talked about the fact, I think I may have said it when I met with you earlier, but we started with 5 true freshmen last season throughout the year, 2 on the offensive line. And of those 2 offensive linemen, Tro in this freshman class, super excited about the transfers we brought in, and super excited about the returning players that have all, stepped up their game since they came back. So I'm excited for everybody, Hill. I gave you a couple names, though.
So, and no surprise here, he's mainly talking about new faces to the program, whether it be freshmen or transfer guys, potentially having the opportunity to shine coming up on Saturday. And, of course, it's not the end-all, be-all of a one-game performance. It's more about what happened over the course of the entire spring, like talking about a guy with Torricelli Simpkins, who's had a good spring overall, and interested to see what he's going to do in that game type of environment coming up on Saturday. But, he mentioned the running back room, and we look at that, you look at the wide receiver room, basically it's been completely overdone and restructured, and almost all new faces for the most part, especially in the running back room. So having the opportunity to just kind of get a glimpse of what that room's going to look like as a whole, with so many new faces, that being from the transfer portal as well as coming in as true freshmen as well.
Yeah, and I also like that Shane Beamer said that, how some coaches will be like, you practice how you play. There's no such thing as a gamer, and there's no such thing as when the lights come on. Like, I feel like Spurrier was always he was very much about practice, and didn't really like the idea of a gamer. And we've seen Beamer say, like, look, this game matters. Does it mean you erase the other 14 practices? Of course not. But what you do on Saturday in front of fans, in the stadium, in front of the TV cameras, some guys respond to that differently than others. For some guys, maybe they play a little bit timid because they're not used to playing in front of fans and certainly not TV. Whereas other guys are like, oh, the light's on me. Like, I'm going to take my game to another level. They kind of use that adrenaline to their advantage. So I think that the game, you can't, and Mike asked the question later or earlier in there, I think, you can't look at the game and be like, just because a guy had a big Saturday, that they're automatically a starter or they're automatically going to be a superstar or whatever. But it does matter. So for all these newcomers, for all the guys Beamer listed off, and then on and on and on, all the guys after that, all the quarterbacks too, this is an opportunity to showcase your ability to the coaching staff, and really to give yourself a springboard to build confidence going into the offseason, because before we know it, we're going to be sitting here right at this spot right here talking about South Carolina versus ODU.
Yeah, and Beamer did bring up, hey, we don't. It is important because it can't be the end all be all, but we don't get to play against another team that's not ourselves until you go play Old Dominion. And so for the coaching staff and for the players alike, this is a scrimmage. This is the closest approximation that you can get. And you only have a few of them during the spring. And then, you get into summer, and then the preseason, you only have a few more of them as well. So we have seen there are plenty of instances where a guy has a big spring game, and you brought this up, I think, yesterday, Wes. Spring game superstar, doesn't end up doing much during the season. And you can't really put a blanket reason for it. Sometimes a guy is out there against third and fourth string doing some things, and it kind of gets a little bit misconstrued. Sometimes a guy's out there early making plays against the ones, and for whatever reason, they get to the season and things don't end up translating. But what I do know is if you're watching out there and it's good on good for the most part, and a guy's out there making plays, that captures your attention. If you're a fan, if you're, other guys on the team, if you're the coaching staff, you'd rather have that than not, right? So there are some things you can take away from it because it's a scrimmage situation.
Well, and especially for the young guys coming in as true freshmen, and yes, it's not the same as it's going to be on a fall Saturday where you have a packed out stadium and you're going up against an opponent that you're not going up against in practice every single day anyway, but there is something about the game and environment, the game setting of not having a coach over your shoulder the entire time telling you do this, do that, you're doing this wrong, you're doing this right, going out there, being out on your own a little bit more in these game type scenarios. You have officials on the field, you have crowds in the stands, the lights legitimately will be on Saturday night in Williams-Brice Stadium, and seeing how those young guys react to that and what that means for their progress coming along and if they can be a part of the team and contribute when the fall rolls around.
Yeah, I think with freshmen, these days you do have a little bit longer to show what you can do and show you can help. But this is one of your first opportunities to go ahead and show that. Like I remember looking at teams, kind of, all right, which freshman's going to be ready? And it's like, all right, they got 2 scrimmages in the preseason, and that's really the only time you have to show you can help the team. And then it's like, all right, go to the scout team. College football is not built like that anymore. More and more freshmen are playing, and so many of these guys, everybody but 3 of the freshmen are already here. So it's a great opportunity for you. And guess what? Even if you don't play well, it's something to build off of. It's something to sort of go ahead and try and maybe, oh, man, I react. I've never been nervous in my life, and I reacted this way to this. What can I do to better prepare myself? You would rather have that moment now than have that moment coming up, in September, October, whenever, and have to experience it in front of more fans and kind of be in a situation where you're not comfortable. So I think spring games, as long as you can keep everybody healthy, it's a great thing.
Yeah, at the end of the day, as long as no one gets hurt, because it was Jalen Nichols that got hurt in the spring game a year ago, and that just kind of set off the dominoes of what will be a tumultuous fall for the Gamecocks as far as injuries on the offensive line. So hopefully can avoid that. Everybody comes out good going into next week, and we have a good summer and camp leading up to what is hopefully a great season as well. You'll be able to hear from Coach Beamer one more time, by the way, coming up tomorrow night on Carolina Calls as he gives his final thoughts ahead of Saturday's spring game. Again, that's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock right here on the game. Tonight at 6 o'clock, you can hear from Coach Kingston as he recaps what's happened in baseball over the past weekend. Looks ahead to a very tough series against Arkansas coming up this weekend at Founders Park. Speaking of baseball, we'll come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Talking about a win last night on the road down in Charleston for the Gamecock baseball team. That's coming up. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
This one is lifted high in the air left center field, racing back to the wall. And one hops on the track off the left center field wall. Nolan's waved around third. Petrie's headed there behind him. The throw will not be made by the shortstop. It's an RBI triple for Ethan Petrie. And the Gamecocks strike first in Charleston. 1-0. Top of the first inning.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. That was called last night on the Gamecocks Radio Network. Ethan Petrie with the RBI triple to get the scoring started for the Gamecocks as they pick up the 4-3 victory over the Citadel last night down there in Charleston for the victory in the midweek. And at the end of the day, does beating Charleston on a Tuesday, beating the Citadel on a Tuesday do a whole lot for your resume? It doesn't, but it continues the momentum this team has had over the course of the past week, winning a game against A&M, beating North Carolina last week, winning 2 out of 3 against Florida as they get set for a very tough task of Arkansas coming to town this weekend.
Well, yeah, it's not a resume builder or highlighter, but at the same time, it's what you avoid by winning the game. I think you're avoiding having that loss on your resume. And if you look at this thing, guys, I mean, win total isn't the be all everything of this, but you got to grab every single win you can, and I don't care who the opponent is for this team, because as we've talked about basically for weeks now, the schedule is brutal, and I tend to look at these schedules kind of a little bit at the time, like, a few series at the time, and if you look at the stretch that's coming up, it remains brutal. You got Arkansas coming into town this weekend to just continue a little bit of the momentum from the weekend when you beat Florida at Florida. That's the first time that's happened in a long time as far as a series win in Gainesville. And so to do that, to carry some momentum, I know the fan base has been a little bit just sort of iffy, a little up and down about this season, but you need the Gamecock fans excited. You need them in the building this weekend. You need them to create a home field advantage. And you just didn't want to have to deal with the sort of down, not that I feel like this team they're good at shaking off losses. Mm-hmm. They really are. But you didn't want to sort of just hear about it on social media, around town, stuff like that, going into this massive series this weekend.
Yeah, and this is something that they've been, aside the Georgia Southern loss, the midweeker, that was ugly. I mean, you said that yesterday, Wes. But other than that, this team has been pretty good at we've seen those years, right? We've seen those years where you look back and you go, man, there's some midweek losses that have kind of added up here. And you haven't seen that this year, notwithstanding that game. So you're able to, I like the way you put it, you don't gain much, but you certainly, you avoid losing, something from a resume standpoint. You don't have a midweek loss to a Citadel team that isn't good at all on that resume. And then you got 2 more. Obviously, you guys covered the slate, as we know. I mean, Arkansas coming to town. You got a really good, kind of out of nowhere Kentucky team coming in. You got Missouri, and then you play Georgia and Tennessee, and those are both going to be tests. You're on the road at Tennessee. Georgia has what's our guy's name, Tyler? The hitter for Georgia.
Oh, Charlie Condon.
Yeah, he has like 800 home runs already this season. Yep. I mean, he hits a homer every time he gets up. So that'll be a challenge.
It's Tyler's favorite player.
Is it?
There's your weekly
future Atlanta Brave, Charlie Condon.
There's your weekly mention.
I haven't done it in a while, Tom.
I know you have. You've been better about it.
But you've only got 2 midweekers left, right?
None next week because of exams.
You got a Winthrop game in Rock Hill. And then you play East Tennessee State. Shout out Nate Atkins.
Yeah. One thing to come away from last night, and we talked about this a lot coming away from the weekend, the emergence of Will Tippett at that 9 spot where he's had a struggle at the plate this entire season. Obviously, a really good defender playing shortstop, but the hitting's just not been there. And Coach Kingston talked about this with Jay and Elijah the other day. They decided to stop hitting him switch, focusing him primarily in the right box now. And over the past 3 games, he's gotten 2 hits the first 2 games against Florida, and then 2 hits last night as well against the Citadel, including that home run in the 7th inning. So he's finally kind of hitting his groove. Maybe focusing on just being a right-handed hitter was the magic sauce that he needed. It seems to be going well.
So I've long thought that the best, most sort of natural boost, the most natural drug in the world is confidence.
Yeah.
And confidence can take you so many places. Obviously, you don't get to the SEC level without having talent. So for so many of these guys, and yes, there are, of course, baselines and upsides and stuff like that, but confidence can take you a long way. And Tippett, to me, it felt like just watching, this is watching from TV, to be honest, the confidence was down. And it's hard to remain confident when it's just not going well. But also, once you start to see good things happen as a baseball player, and we know how streaky this game can be, then it does sort of snowball and build from there. So great for Tippett. I think if you have him just being solid at the bottom of this order as opposed to what it kind of was there for a stretch, that completely changes the dynamic of the top of the order as well. And so kudos to him, man. Hopefully he can keep that going. I'm sure it's been a long season for him, I'm sure, personally. So very happy for him, and we'll see if he can keep that going.
Yeah, it was brought up on the broadcast in the last series against Florida. It was like the Florida announcers, right, were on the broadcast, and they were like, man, I think it was game 2, and Tippett had a good and they're like, this kid doesn't look like a 200 hitter to me, because he has shown, I think it's been inconsistency, right? And we even saw that. He had a good series against Florida, but we even saw some of that, So for him, just about honing in on those things, getting more consistent. But you're right, he'll show flashes where he's hitting for power, he's hitting extra bases. You see those things. So like you said, Wes, it's clearly there, and I think it's just about unlocking it. And there have been strides made, over the last probably couple weeks.
And again, you'll hear from Coach Kingston again coming up tonight at 6 o'clock on Carolina Calls to give his thoughts on this upcoming weekend series against Arkansas, as South Carolina looking to once again make it back to the postseason and maybe make it to Omaha this year as well. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show with myself and Terry Ford coming up next right here on The Game.
All right, guys, before we get out of here, let us tell you about one more great sponsor. That's our friends over at Goal Line Framing in West Columbia. Like I've been telling you, graduation time right around the corner, believe it or not. And I know some people are just